What is your view on employing someone with a disability?
Well, look, I think it's really important that we try and ensure that as many employers as possible are open to the opportunity to put someone on that may have a disability. And I think that obviously in the past there's always been some discrimination faced by people with disabilities trying to engage in the workforce. Often that's based on perceptions rather than about the realities of whether or not someone has the abilities to do the job at hand. And I think that's really important that we get people focusing in on what the job requires and whether or not people have the ability to do that job, whether they have disabilities or not. Now I know organisations like NOVA do a great job in advocating on behalf of people with disabilities so that employers get a better insight of what opportunities come with employing people with disabilities.
Now, there is a reasonable adjustments clause in the Disability Discrimination Act which says that all shops and services are required to modify their premises to accommodate disabled customers and clients. There are many places in the Penrith area which I personally encounter great difficulties accessing. Are you aware of any work that will be carried out to comply to the Disability Discrimination Act and improve wheelchair accessibility in the Penrith area?
I think traditionally there's always been a greater acceptance of the need to improve building standards for new facilities rather than to retrofit existing facilities. But the Disability Discrimination Act does deal with the issue of retrofitting through the reasonable adjustments requirements.
Do you think pensioners who receive the disability support pension are given enough money for them to survive?
Yeah. Look, it's not a lot of money, and there's no doubt about that. And that's something that our government had recognised and continues to recognise. We did undertake a significant round of pension reform in terms of the increase that we have now provided in the pension, which affected the age pension and various other pensions, including the disability support pension. I guess the approach that we have taken is that you need to ensure, and in particular the single pension, where there's a couple involved, the overheads, the costs associated with running a household, there are some benefits that can be obtained by couples that reduce some of those costs. But for single people, it's always a challenge to get by.
In your first speech to Parliament, you talk about empowering people to realise their potential. What steps has the Lindsay electorate taken to make this happen for people with disabilities?
Well, can I begin by saying I'm flattered that somebody's read my first speech to Parliament. Thank you for that. Look, what I said in my first speech to Parliament remains, and this is one of the core beliefs that I have that has led me into going into politics, is that I do believe that government has an important role to play in trying to assist people from all manner of backgrounds, with all manner of abilities or disabilities, to realise their potential. Because if people have the chance to realise their potential, with hard work, if they take advantage of those opportunities, then I'm confident that people will be able to collectively make a great contribution to our community.
Now, you're an ambassador for the Samuel Morris Foundation, which was created after a local 2-year-old boy survived a near drowning in 2006. Why is this such an important issue to you?
Well, look, I met Samuel and his parents, Michael and Joanne, a number of years ago, and I have to say that I find both Samuel and his parents to be very inspirational people. I've got a lot of respect for them and have come to know them quite well at a personal level and have always used whatever opportunities I could find to try and advocate on behalf of their cause. And I think that I'm inspired by Samuel's parents because not only are they living with the consequences of Samuel's near-drowning experience, which has created enormous consequences in terms of how they live their lives, because obviously the care that Samuel requires is considerable. He's spending a lot of time going in and out of hospital, and a lot of stress has come with those operations and the operations that continue to occur. So on the one hand, you've got all of those challenges, but on the other hand, I'm just so inspired that in the face of all of that, that Michael and Joanne could set up a foundation.
As you know, there is a shortage of public housing available in Western Sydney, even more shortage for those with a disability. Are you aware of any measures to put the proposed billions of dollars for public housing towards buildings that will be suitable for disabled people?
Yeah, look, as I mentioned before, we're putting record amounts of money into social and public housing, and that will mean several hundred more dwellings within our local community.
And do you know a rough time frame of how long these buildings will take to start helping people?
Yeah, well look, some of those works have already begun. With the repair work, a lot of that work has already been undertaken. So in some cases that's about bringing housing back into the pool of houses that can be used because they couldn't be used previously. In other cases it's just about making existing dwellings more accessible so that you might be able to accommodate someone with a disability in a place that previously you couldn't. Many of those buildings, those changes should have already occurred and have already occurred. In terms of new buildings, that will take some time. As I mentioned, I've recently visited a couple of houses that were being built over in Penrith, and it will take a few months before those houses are fully constructed.
My blog readers and I have come across a lot of incidences of people misusing disabled parking permits and disabled parking spaces. What's your view on this, and what do you think needs to be done to stop it?
Well look, I should say that the federal government doesn't deal with the permits themselves, and that's really something that the state government looks after. So I don't pretend to know all the detail of how it works, but it's something that's always really annoyed me, to be honest, is when you see people park in a disabled parking spot that have no entitlement to do so. I think, to be honest, it's one of the lowest things you can do. But there are plenty of people that do it. I understand that there are also issues in terms of who is eligible for the passes, and there are issues that the state government's working through in terms of determining what threshold of disability a person has to have in order to be entitled to a pass.
You also support the Luke Prittis Foundation, which supports families living with autism. You talked about the Parliamentary Secretary working to deliver more services for autism sufferers. Are you aware of what these services will include?
Yeah. Look, I've had a bit to do with the Luke Prittis Foundation as well, and know Luke Prittis and Holly Prittis very well, and their son Cooper is autistic. And I've come to know some great people and some great families through their organisation. In terms of the services that are being provided, one of the areas where we've invested a lot of money is in early intervention when it comes to children that are diagnosed with autism. The research is very clear that if you're able to intervene at that early stage, then the benefits of that intervention will be greater over time, so the outcomes are better over time. So that doesn't mean you forget about people as they get older, but the more money you can spend earlier on, the better the outcomes. And that has meant that the government has decided to make available to families autism packages, funding packages, and those packages essentially give parents and families access to funds for services for their children. And in particular, that would be for things like occupational therapist, speech therapist, and various other ancillary services that might be needed.
Well, that's it from me. Thank you for your time, David.
I've heard so much about Joe blogs over the years, so it's good to meet you.
Thank you. I'm Jodie Ruvo for Can Do Ability.